The Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, is pursuing two new paths for peace with Rwanda. The U.S. has brokered a deal between the DRC and Rwanda, known as the Washington Accord. Meanwhile, Qatar is mediating for peace between the DRC and M23 rebels. The Washington Accord aims to end hostilities and support for armed groups in eastern DRC. While in Qatar, a declaration of principles has been signed between representatives of the DRC government and those of the M23. So this week on the program, we ask, can these new initiatives bring lasting peace to the DRC? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. The conflict in the DRC began in 1996, triggered by the fallout of the 1994 Rwandan genocide. This saw over 2 million Hutus, including Interahamwe militia, flee into eastern Zaire, today the DRC. Since the Second Congo War broke out in 1998, at least 10 major peace or ceasefire agreements have been signed. The first was the Lusaka ceasefire agreement signed in July 1999. In 2002, at least 3 agreements were signed, including the Sun City Agreement, Pretoria Accord, and Luanda Agreement. The Acte d'Engagement was signed at the Kivu Conference in January 2008. The following year, a peace agreement between the DRC government and the CNDP militia, also known as the March 23rd Agreement, was signed. And happy with the implementation of the deal, former CNDP fighters launched a new rebellion and adopted the name M23. In 2013, 11 African countries signed the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework, which led to the military defeat of the original M23 rebellion, before the group resurfaced in 2021. And most recently, on June the 27th this year, the DRC-Rwanda peace deal, also known as the Washington Accord, was signed in the U.S. between the foreign ministers of DRC and Rwanda. The signing of the Declaration of Principles between the DRC government representatives and the M23 rebel leaders followed on July the 19th, 2025 in Qatar. And joining me now to unpack the DRC-Rwanda peace deals are from Dakar in Senegal, Oluwole Ojewale, Regional Coordinator for the Central Africa region at the Institute for Security Studies. From Doha in Qatar, Dr. Abdullah Al-Qatari, expert in political economy. And from Kampala in Uganda, Joseph Ochieno, African affairs expert. Gentlemen, welcome to the program and thank you for joining in this discussion. Oluwole, let me start off with you because in June of this year, the foreign ministers of the DRC and Rwanda signed a peace deal in Washington brokered by the United States. What are the key issues addressed in that deal?
Without trying to theorize whatever happened in the United States, I think the central piece of the peace negotiation is that the people want peace. They don't want the bombs to be flying over their heads. They don't want people to die again. They want to go about their businesses. And it appears that both states were also committed in that meeting. But I think the fallout has clearly shown that there is really no sustained commitment. And it's looking like one step forward and 2 steps backward, because it all started from the Luanda process to Nairobi, then to the EAC, SADC, and then to the Washington, and here we're back in Qatar now. So the central piece is peace, and then with the way things are going around, it appears that the center can't really hold, and then mere anarchy is just loose upon the whole places.
Oluwole, you're talking about a fallout. What are you talking about here? What are you alluding to in that fallout?
Nobody expected that after the fanfare and the celebration in Washington, and we're still going to be proceeded to Qatar to sign another agreement, as though it's about what they call forum shopping for agreements. I mean, we all celebrated the Washington consensus, Democratic Republic of Congo, and then the M23 fighters, and then we are back again at another 3 pages draft of a peace agreement. It really isn't really about signing agreements, it's about staying committed to those agreements. Otherwise, they can leave that place tomorrow and then proceed to Switzerland or Jeddah to go and sign another agreement.
Dr. Al-Qatari, let me get your view here, particularly on the signing of that Declaration of Principles in Qatar, which happened in July, and that was to end fighting in Eastern DRC. Why is the DRC government opening to France negotiations in Qatar at the same time in the United States?
This is the nature of negotiations. Even as I hear your respected guest, they step forward, step backward as negotiation goes. You need to gain confidence, you need to gain commitment, and it takes painstaking to put things together. Every time negotiators agree, they need to actually follow that on the field. They need to do it in practical sense. And that's a challenge after so much fighting and the unorganized and chaotic state. So Qatar has a very good relation, as you know,
right,
with Rwanda, with Congo. So, and Qatar also have a great experience in putting these agreements together and also following with actual practical steps on the field. Everybody needs to be committed. Everybody needs to put a lot of effort. It's
right,
not an easy process.
So, Joseph, let me rope you in here because you've heard the sentiments. But I want to find out from you, though, what you think that the DRC and Rwanda hope to achieve in Qatar and what they hope to achieve in Washington.
I think the bottom line is peace for DRC. Except that when the DRC president, we must say, approached particularly Washington, there was a sense of pragmatism, but quite clearly also there was a sense of despair. DRC hoped that at the war front there wasn't possibly much going on in their favor, except that perhaps if they talked Washington into talking Rwanda, they might check the process while we said to talk peace, and then the guns are quiet, the guns are silent. But maybe out of that, there might emerge a possibility of space in which conversations can begin on equal terms. But unfortunately, as I said, while that started from a DRC perspective, who then possibly were the desperate weaker side? They were confident that a Washington presence might pressure Rwanda for the obvious reasons, and from that perspective, Rwanda may then come in as an equal. But regardless, this is a conversation about fundamental issues that thus far I'm not quite sure that is anywhere mentioned. If really the most apparent thing is we want peace, but in exchange there is gold, there are minerals, then the underlying issues about, one, fundamentally the question of identity, number two, the questions of resources, and then number three, the question of sovereignty are not mentioned, and then that the minerals become the center rather than the people's, then I'm sure, unfortunately, it's a false start. But quickly, Beatrice, that we're talking Qatar, that we're talking Washington, right, I think it's a ringing indictment on the ability of the African nations to be able to create spaces to be able to deal with this. So that is the East African community and indeed the African Union, who are permanently and seemingly at the moment initially absent.
Dr. Al-Qatari, I need your response here in terms of what Qatar is going to get from here. What are Qatar's strategic interest in engaging in the DRC Rwanda peace processes?
I don't know to what extent your viewers and you are aware of what Qatar. This is a major area that Qatar has been engaged in, either in various parts of the world. Qatar is known to be the peacemaker. If it's in Afghanistan, as you guys know, Afghanistan-United States agreement, if it's also the agreement between Iran and United States, if it's also Africa in terms of Somalia, in terms of also Djibouti and Eritrea, Qatar is always present in terms of peacemaking. So in general, that is what the Qataris really are interested in, to have peace in Africa. Of course, the good relationship between Qatar and Rwanda and the investment in Rwanda in various areas give Qatar a little bit of leverage on Rwanda to get this deal together. The same thing like for Congo is also enticing the various parties that if peace is there, then development, economic development is better for all parties to have peace and to have, because at the end of the day, having peace means the fruit of that peace is really for everybody in between Rwanda and Congo and various parties.
The best for everyone is to have peace. Peace is the fundamental issue here. But in March, Oluwale, Qatar brokered another surprise meeting between the presidents of DRC and Rwanda, during which they called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Has the situation on the ground changed at all? Is there less fighting, more dialogue, or is it just more talk now?
I think it's a mixture of both, because generally tensions have been doused to a significant degree, but people don't move into the healing mode until the core issues, the underlying factors are actually addressed. So like I mentioned earlier, it's almost getting to the point of forum shopping for the past 2 years now in terms of how many actors have gotten involved in these. And then peace is the fundamental objective that people want to achieve on ground. But we also need to look beyond what is obvious to the optical nerves, in the sense that most times when countries get involved in what is going on in other countries like this, whether as an intervention or as an interference, what is obvious is the fact that everybody also wants to profit from what is going on. There's a strategic interest in which the United States actually got involved in this, because at the heart of what is going on is that areas presently controlled by the M23 are rich in critical minerals. And then even Qatar has significant investment in the entire region. And then I think to a large extent, we can't lose sight of that. But the people are interested in peace, but it appears that the critical actors that are engaging in the negotiation are probably not really getting the message in terms of actually involving and getting these off the table in terms of the way we've been moving around the cycles over time. And the last thing that I also need to add to this layer is the fact that as things are going on, it appears parties are interested in people signing the dotted lines, but not really reaching into the nitty-gritty of what is driving the conflict. That is the sense I read out of these circles.
So, Joseph, how do these, the Washington and the Qatar agreements differ from the previous regional peace efforts, like, for instance, the Rwanda and the Nairobi processes? Because it's been a long line of peace processes for the DRC now.
I think that's an important question. What are the differences? And for that reason, why would anyone believe that this one might hold on and this time perhaps bear fruit? I think that's the fundamental question. And that's why I think while all of us want peace and while all of us want stability, it's not very clear that it would happen, particularly for two reasons. One is that, as I said, Washington sort of was invited here, but it was invited here for sort of like materialist gain. And of course, DR Congo knew very well that President Trump was possibly much more of a pragmatic businessman rather than anybody else interested in major issues in Congo. And the timing was apt, possibly very important, to check China's influence on Congo. Then maybe that might be a sufficient motivation for Trump to bang the table and ensure that he's able to sufficiently push Rwanda and sufficiently help to check Congo so that nothing sort of technically, by and large, goes wrong. But on the other hand, we have also Congo. It's President Tshisekedi. How much of a political will from Congo does Tshisekedi have? One, from the political class, and then two, generally from the citizenry, considering the fact that actually what is at stake in exchange for their sovereignty, in exchange for peace, is basically their fundamental mineral wealth, which saw them lose their first prime minister in 1961. Isn't that ironical?
So we're going to look at the implementation process in a little later. But Oluwole, I want to get your final take here on where you think that this whole process now leaves the Nairobi and Luanda processes, which had already laid out modalities for implementation, for timelines for ending the conflict.
If you look at how things have been moving in the past 2 years, like I mentioned earlier, looking like one step forward and 2 steps backward, because we are here because African Union has not been able to live up to expectations. We are here because neighboring states have not been able to live up to expectation in terms of their regional commitment to be able to really resolve this crisis. That is the reason why things have moved in the direction of offshoring of that responsibility for peace negotiation. And if you want to move in the direction of negotiation, really, I think if things are signed, because I was personally optimistic when this negotiation moved in the direction of Washington. And I think if Washington really want to enforce that peace agreement and elicit commitment from the actors, it wouldn't be a bad idea if, for instance, the station, maybe their military artillery, one in Kinshasa and another one in Kigali, at least for the purpose of deterrence. You can't really have a peace agreement if there is no peacekeeping. Both have to go together. I don't know who is on ground that is doing the peacekeeping work now. So I think that is where the lapse is, where it appears that everything is just on the paper, because if you listen to the envoy, the United States envoy to the Great Lakes region at Washington, the next thing he said is that, oh, we're moving to Sudan now. More like, oh, there is a lot of tension to be doused. Okay, we have ticked the box here. Right. Let's also go and tick the box in Sudan, as we have ticked in Gaza and all those things. I don't think that is how peace negotiation is supposed to be undertaken.
All right, gentlemen, we are going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we will look at the implementation of the deals and the challenges this may pose. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me are Oluwole Ajewale, Abdullahi Al-Qatari, and Joseph Ochieno. Before the break, we broke down the contents of the peace deals. Let's now look at whether they can be implemented. Joseph, let me start off with you here, because Dr. Al-Qatari talked about the need for practical implementation after the signing of the deal. One of the issues that has come up here is the whole question of disarmament. Does disarmament, according to the Washington Accord, does that mean that the M23 will now lay down their weapons? You know, how is the disarmament and integration of the armed groups proposed by the Washington Accord going to be undertaken?
I think if there was any major gaps amongst the many, one of them was actually the apparent nuances around which there is sufficient clarity on the key players beyond the two nation states. Where is M23 in this? Where are the others whom Rwanda accuse, meaning the alleged armed Rwandese refugees in Congo and all those other forces that Rwanda accuses the Congolese authorities in supporting? But also at the same time, where are those other forces, including Ugandan rebels in Congo? And where is Uganda as a nation state, who has also been ever accused of having a hand in Congo? That really is primarily important, and that's why I was hoping that as part of the agreement, you know, as it were, that there was need for a clear mention of these key players, which was insufficient. But that said, we just hope, and I really do, that because of the manner in which this agreement was transactionally made, that the technocratic element of it, which is basically military power of the US, will compel Rwanda to play cool, will compel the DR Congo to play their beat. Now, how the two parties are able to persuade the warring factions, parties between themselves, I think is a much more challenging one for me. And from the experience we've had with the conflicts in this sub-region and in particular in that area over the last several years, I think it's very difficult to see. But once guns are settled, I think one of our guests, our colleagues mentioned, Mashallah, in as long as the guns are settled, in as long as there is an expressive position from the Rwandan authorities that no firing is short, from the Congolese authorities that no firing short, I think the rest we can say could be possibly left for detail.
Dr. Al-Qatari, key question here on the key players, and one of them is M23. You know, M23 is one of about 100 of the armed groups that have been fighting in eastern DRC. Under what legitimacy, though, is M23 being invited in the negotiations in Qatar?
In conflict, why is there a conflict, and who are the parties in that conflict? So if we are going to resolve an issue, and any issue like this, there has two sides. So March 23 is basically the group that has been fighting with the Congo this time. So if Congo wants peace, they need to have the groups sitting there and negotiate, and have those groups also with the Congo reach a level of understanding, a common ground that they can work together, because this is the basic issue. What is the fighting about? Why these groups are fighting? What is their objective? It could be anything, areas, minerals, sometimes political association, political engagement, you name it. The point of negotiations to have these parties come and talk about all these issues, then figure out a solution for those issues where both parties can accept. If anybody is able to understand, negotiate, figure out, and come to this level of agreement, I think it's the Qataris. Now, how they're going to do it, especially when it comes to groups, is, like a nation state is easy to figure out. It's easy to also have them to be committed, disciplined, and all that, because there is a structure that is abided by and sovereignty. But with groups, it's much harder. But it's doable. We've seen it done in the past. Qatar has done it successfully many times.
Both of these agreements are calling for a permanent ceasefire. What guarantees exist to ensure that both DRC and Rwanda adhere to their terms, given past violations of the similar accords that you've mentioned earlier on?
I think everything appears abstract. I personally read the draft of the ongoing negotiation. Of course, I know that everything cannot be brought to that agreement. But I think if there's really a commitment on the part of the gladiators that are trying to show interest as interventionists in this crisis, that peacekeeping option must be on the table. There is vague reference to all parties need to agree to ceasefire, permanent ceasefire agreement and all those things. But I do not see the deterrence mechanism, and it can come in different ways. It can be that maybe sanctions will be spelled out for anyone who probably violates the content of that agreement. I don't know where that is kept. I can't see it on the draft. Even the agreement that was signed in the United States, I didn't see anything like that. And it's just about deterrence. You don't really need to mobilize. But if, for instance, if the African Union is able to demonstrate that capability, or any country in Africa, maybe it is Kenya, or maybe it is South Africa, or even the United States of America, to mobilize the relevant strategic military assets, just to be stationed in strategic position, one in Kigali and maybe one in Kinshasa, at least they will know that there is somebody that is watching the movement and looking at what is going on. That standby military asset, it's a form of deterrence. I don't see that clearly. If they are going to come in terms of trade sanction or any form of sanction, I don't see that clearly. And those are the issues that actually make it easier for agreement to actually slip into these horrible experience of guns and bullets going on in the here again. And I think the last thing that makes it really complicated, like Dr. Qatari mentioned, is the fact that you're dealing with non-state actor here, M23, although in most instances it's Rwanda that is showing up on the table to do that negotiation on their behalf. It makes a lot of things nebulous. And then largely, if we are able to really get people to mobilize that support within the African continent to actually impose that deterrence that could come in those two options that I've suggested, we might be able to really see some commitment come on the part of those actors that are negotiating. But otherwise, I think things appear like abstract ideas now on the paper in terms of that implementation or commitment or deterrence.
Right, gentlemen, we are going to wind up in a minute, and I want to get your very brief comments and your final thoughts. Let me start off with you, Olewale. This is the latest in a very long line of failed peace deals in that part of the region. Do you see the Qatar and U.S. initiatives finally bringing peace to the DRC?
I think it offers some promises, but we have to wait patiently and see where this is going to lead. Because like it has been emphasized here, Qatar has a deep history of negotiating some of the most complex conflict that the world has seen. The Taliban, the U.S. negotiation that took place in Qatar about the withdrawal of the United States of America. I think that is one of the most consequential negotiations that Qatar has handled in the recent time. So if both countries are bringing their experience to bear, I think we can be optimistic. But if the experience of the last 2 to 3 years offers anything, I think we have to just be cautionary. We have to be cautious of that optimism.
Joseph, your sentiments?
Because it's a transactional deal, I hope it does bring peace. Whatever way we take it, I hope it does bring peace. But unfortunately, because it was also motivated by, from the U.S. perspective, for actually checking in China, I hope that the rest of the world, and particularly in this case the African Union, recognizes that, and in the interest of the DR Congo, make sure that everything is made possible to make sure that, well, this is a check. For the moment, I think it is possibly too early to call, and therefore too early for me to make a conclusive observation that it will be. But it's really, ideally, our entire hope that it does.
Dr. Qatari, your final thoughts?
I feel that Qatar, as it's been able to resolve lots of issues, it's still negotiating the Israeli-Palestinian negotiation. Qatar is doing that. As we said, in my feeling, if anybody can bring this together, it's going to be Qatar. If the U.S. is in support, and as I said, actually support for peace, the expectation is pretty high. Now, is it unfolding peace agreement? It might be that, but they will take it step by step, and it will be resolved, and hopefully we'll have peace between Rwanda, Congo, and the groups that are now fighting. Hopefully they will all get the message. And hopefully also our people will get also the details, all that needs to be done. They have the experience. Let's be hopeful.
Gentlemen, thank you all very much for your insights. But that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, Oluwole Ojewale, Regional Coordinator for Central Africa Region at the Institute for Security Studies. From Doha, Dr. Abdullahi Qatari, expert in political economy. And from Kampala in Uganda, Joseph Ochieno, African Affairs expert. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's goodbye.